Hello, welcome to Philosophy Roulette number 111, where we get philosophy off the internet, read and review it live. So you could be here and alongside, and you can come over here to this chat box here, and your comments will show up, and I will try to answer your questions as best I can. Doesn't really, no idea if I know what I'm talking about, but it doesn't really matter because that's why it's roulette. So you could send me something, but otherwise I guess go see what's on the hot sheets, as it were, here in Phil Papers. Oh, alright, I saw most of this stuff earlier today, so you know what I'm going to do? Because the same people they publish a lot, and so they swamp the front page. So let's go find some journals I haven't looked at recently, and you know what, let's see if I've seen a Synthes paper in a while. I mean, some of these, they just publish longer works, so it doesn't, it's harder to read anything there because I don't want to go for hours. Let's see what's forthcoming, if we got page numbers. Or if it does or if it doesn't, we'll find out. Noose? Two-stage luck. Yeah, see, a little too long maybe. I think. Oh, that's right. This was, yeah, I don't think this is available. Let's see. Oh no! Why'd that happen? Very strange, but alright, whatever. Let's see what else we've got. Oh, that's it. That's the only one that was a blank. That's why we don't come here. That's not good. 1 to 14, maybe. I don't know why it shows the thingy is bugged like that. Joint attention and perceptual exclusion. What should we believe about the future? Against global method safety. Composition as identity. What does that mean? Composition as identity. How it can be true and how I think that it should be going. I don't really believe that composition is identity, but maybe this person has something to say. Introduction. Propositional complexity. It's 32 pages. A little excessive for me. Oh wow, this is a huge, yeah, they publish a lot. Look at this, oh my god. Alright, so, can look at what these are. Fictional reports. Nope. Perceptual experience, and it's there. Let's see how long it is. 14, that's kind of reasonable. Alright, let's see. This is 12 pages. Let's see if it's available. Nope. Oh, this was on the special issue of the Epistemology of Ernest Sosa. That could be cool. Let's just continue to see what we got. Composition as identity. Oh, it was here. 29 pages, but oh, there's too much, lots of logic too. Nope, not doing that. Oh, that's what I was just looking at. How'd that happen? Okay. So what have we got? We've got joint attention, 14 pages, and we've got, this is, hey Aristotle. I have no idea if my commands work, so that showed up to me at least. Sorry if I called you out. Let's see. Against global method safety versus joint attention and perceptual experience. Let's do this one. What's that? Global method safety analysis. True belief P is safe. Alright, let's just go see if there's too much logic in any of these, because that's what kills me if I have to sit around like reading out formulas is just too much of a pain in the butt. No, both of these seem kind of reasonable. Alright, so we got... Oh, dude, this is 111. Thank you for your support, though. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm still doing like 2 a day for 6 days a week. Do you have a choice? What would you like to me to read? Joint attention and perceptual experience, or against global method safety? Why should I make decisions? You can make decisions. Because, I mean, I usually flip a coin at this point. I don't care. Alright, you get another 5 seconds to decide, or else I'm going to pick a random one. Oh, my friend. I have read almost everything in analysis and thought in like the last like 2 years already. Like I've gone through years of their stuff. Okay. Goodbye. That's cool. I appreciate you stopping by. Okay, and here we go. Introduction. Unbeknownst to each other, but known to us. Alright, so I had to pull out the Spaceballs reference. Unbeknownst to each other. Yeah, they're good. My dad gave me these. They're really nice. Unbeknownst to each other, we are looking at the same piece of cake. Oh my god, I like this person already. I like cake. Our attention is shared, but we don't know what it is, and therefore the fact that so we're both like staring at the cake. We don't see that we're staring at the cake. Alright, this definitely happens. This probably happened to the author. And therefore the fact that our attention is shared doesn't affect us in any way. But now we both come to realize that we're looking at the same piece of cake. You're like, you're not getting that cake, I'm getting that cake, you're not getting that cake. Our visual attention becomes coordinated, alternating glances with the cake and the other. Each is now aware of the other's attention. Everything about our attention is out in the open, and if one of us were to say, it's mine, the intended referent would be obvious. Thus, we went from a state of merely shared attention to joint attention. But what has changed? Or as Hobson title 2005 has it, what puts the jointness into joint attention? This also, I'm pretty sure someone, Stoner, has said that also. Okay. In recent years, the jointness question has received quite a lot of attention. It is agreed that joint attention is a ubiquitous phenomenon and that it is important to human social interaction because it helps us to coordinate our actions and beliefs. Since the term was introduced in developmental research by Jerome Bruner and colleagues, joint attention has been considered a milestone in children's social and cognitive development. And shortcomings in joint attention have been associated with the onset of autism spectrum disorders. But there is no consensus on what joint attention is. The starting point for many, though not all authors, is that the jointness of joint attention is open between both attenders. What open means. It is fully and immediately transparent to them that they are jointly attending to the same object or state of affairs. The challenge is to go beyond the metaphor of openness. Alright. Let me think for a sec. I mean, what is it when I know someone else is like, I want that piece of cake, I see that other person wants that piece of cake. So it's like we can have like 2 attentions at once. Like I can be paying attention to like the chat, although I'm not very good at that sometimes when reading the paper. But like I can do 2 things at once. I can read the paper I'm reading, which is right in front of me. It's basically, I have the same exact setup on my screen that you're getting broadcast. And I try to keep my eye on the chat. Oh no, the chat's not popping up. Oh, dearie. Alright. So you guys are not seeing what is being written. One sec, I can fix this. I'm having technical difficulties today. Weird. Shucks. I'm sorry about that. You know what I also forgot to do? Let's get the title up. Wow, look at me all in a tizzy. Okay, so yeah, so like I can be attending to two things. So I've got the chat. I was chatting with Aristotle for a second there, and also look at this. And so it's like it may just mean that we are like the attention is overlapped in some way. So there's two things I'm attending to right now: the chat and the paper I'm reading, and that means I'm looking at two things. So if I can look at the person and the cake at the same time, then the person, we're looking at each other, so that one's an overlap, and then we're looking at the same thing at the same time, and so that's an overlap. So this openness maybe comes down to different methods of overlap. At least that's my first pass take at what might be going on here. Anyway, the view that joint attention is to be understood in terms of common knowledge or some related notion like common awareness, common belief, common acceptance, etc. There are various ways of fleshing out this idea, but the simplest is to define that we jointly attend to an object if and only if it is common knowledge between us that each of us is attending to it. Assuming that common knowledge can be defined in terms of knowledge or a related epistemic notion like belief or awareness, this proposal is reductionist in the sense that it defines joint attention in terms of individual mental states. Yeah, joint mental states and joint attention of some sort. An alternative to the knowledge-based approach is to view joint attention as a primitive relation which is irreducible to the individual states of its relata. John Campbell's relational theory is a prominent representative of this view. On Campbell's account, when jointly attending to the cake, each of us experiences the other as jointly attending to the cake, such that you are a constituent of my visual experience, as I am a constituent of yours. Whatever epistemic significance joint attention has in coordinating our actions and beliefs, it results from the sensory experiential character. Unlike the knowledge-based approach, Campbell's analysis is based on the idea that joint attention is fundamentally a phenomenon of sensory experience, and seeks to avoid referring to judgments, inferences, appeals to knowledge, beliefs, or any other higher cognitive processes. For this reason, Campbell's style of analysis has proved to be attractive to cognitive and developmental psychologists. Moreover, the relational view has been claimed to support and complement an interactionist approach to social cognition based on embodied, embedded, and extended interactive processes. In these and other ways, the feasibility of the relational approach is critical to several lines of thinking in social cognitive psychology and the philosophy of mind and language. We argue that Campbell's relational account of joint attention fails to deliver on its promises. In doing so, we do not wish to advocate for the knowledge-based approach, let alone defend it against objections from Campbell or other critics. Rather, we intend to assess the merits of the relational approach in its own right, and we'll argue that, at several points, Campbell's theory threatens to collapse into its competitor. Therefore, we will need to distinguish the knowledge-based view in some detail. To begin with, Section 2 elaborates on the knowledge-based approach that serves as the foil for Campbell's relational account, which is presented in Section 3. Campbell's account is underdeveloped in several respects, and therefore we will need to consider various ways of making it more precise. We then argue that the relational definition of joint attention either results in an infinite regress of perceptual states or requires construal of the notion of co-attention that is substantially identical with the notion of normality employed by knowledge-based theorists, which, according to Campbell, shouldn't be part of an explanation of joint attention. Finally, we discussed two further issues having to do with attention monitoring and failures of joint attention. The recurring theme throughout our discussion is that the problems which Campbell's theory runs into are due to tensions in his claim that joint attention is fundamentally a phenomenon of sensory experience, and therefore not to be explained in terms of knowledge, belief, or awareness. While joint attention undeniably involves sensory experience, our discussion suggests that an explanation of the phenomenon will have to factor in at least some knowledge, belief, or awareness. Okie dokie. So I guess what's going to happen is just get some outlines of the theories and then they're going to poke a hole somewhere. So let's find out. The knowledge-based approach. Campbell presents his theory of joint attention as a superior alternative to the knowledge-based approach. On the latter view, joint attention can be defined as follows. A and B are jointly attending to X if and only if it is common knowledge between A and B that each of them is attending to X. Okay, so common knowledge and attending. So jointly attending, common knowledge. So we've got like a few different things here. We've got this joint attention to the thing, so it's a to an X, and we've got common knowledge that each of them is attending. So it's like the knowledge of the attention. Okay. It doesn't matter for our purposes whether this particular definition is the best way of dealing with the joint attention in terms of common knowledge, nor does it matter whether, for example, common awareness, common belief, or common acceptance might be preferable to common knowledge. The only thing that matters is that all analyses that take this general approach have two features in common. They refer to cognitive states, and they entail that these states give rise to iterative structures like the following. P is common knowledge between A and B if and only if A knows that P, B knows that P, A knows that B knows that P, B knows that A knows that P, and so on ad infinitum. Gotta love stuff like that. Structures like this are the fingerprint of common knowledge, common belief, and so on. On a knowledge-based account, it is this iterative structure that is held to capture the jointness in joint attention. It is important to be clear about the status of this iterative structure, for it is often misunderstood as implying that A and B cannot have common knowledge unless 1. They make an infinite number of inferences, and 2. They mentally represent the outcomes of all these inferences. The first misunderstanding was addressed by David Lewis even before it arose. Note that this is a chain of implications, not steps in anyone's actual reasoning. Therefore, there is nothing improper about its infinite length. While this may not help very much to explain what common knowledge is, it should have sufficed to dispel the notion that it requires an infinite number of inferences as a precognition. Regrettably, Lewis's remark was widely ignored in the subsequent literature, but that is as it may be. Objection 1 is merely a denial of Lewis's remark, and now it has been dispensed with. Objection 2 falls by the wayside as well. Yeah, so I mean, if it's just I know that you know, and then you can keep doing I know that you know that I know as long as you want, but there's no need to do that. Once you get the loop to begin with, then you've got the loop. And you can keep running in circles, but that doesn't matter. Having characterized common knowledge in terms of the iterative structure shown above, it remains to be seen how common knowledge is achieved. Following Lewis and Schiffer, it is generally accepted that there are many types of finite situations, or bases as Lewis calls them, that generate common knowledge. People interacting with each other will soon find out that they share the same language, the same social background, the same hobbies, and so on, and any of these commonalities will serve as a basis for common knowledge. In the case of joint attention, part of the relevant basis will be that A and B take each other to know that if a normal person, that is a person with normal sense faculties, intelligence, and experience, has his eyes open and his head facing an object of a certain size, etc., then that person will see an object of a certain sort is before him. If this normality condition is not fulfilled, joint attention cannot be achieved. For example, if A knows that B's low eye pressure seriously distorts her vision, then A and B cannot jointly attend to their cake. I don't know. I don't know if I like this normal person here. It just means that it's not sufficiently different from the individual. The two individuals aren't sufficiently different that there would be a reason to think that there would be a problem with a mutual recognition of the same thing. So you just need, like, for example, like, me and my cat, or I had a cat, could see the same thing, and cat vision is different from our vision, from human vision, lots of stuff like that, but, there's enough that it isn't so different that we can't, like, me and a cat can look at the same thing and probably we see the same object before us. There's no reason to think that, you'd have to. This is why I just don't like normal. I don't really know what normal means, but there has to be enough of an overlap between stuff. Now that may beg the question here. So this is actually getting more concerning philosophically, that the concept of normal already begs the question that they have some sort of mutual ability to see the thing, and that they are seeing the same thing. Okay, so that's a small worry at the moment because I don't think that's gonna matter. Alright, so the knowledge-based approach invites but does not entail the hypothesis that, apart from the normality condition, which I'm already worried about, joint attention may be affected by practically any kind of background knowledge. Just as individual attention is driven by goals, intentions, and beliefs, so is joint attention. Yeah, so I suspect me and my cat's goals and intentions and beliefs are slightly different. Tomasello notes that in joint attention, I must be sensitive to the features of an object or situation that are relevant for you. Just following your line of gaze is not enough. To illustrate, consider the following scenario. If you point to a tree, the tree's over there. I can follow you pointing gesture, but that does not tell me whether you are attending to the apples it carries, its smooth trunk, or the fungus on its bark. Perhaps we've been out foraging for apples, or alternatively, you have been tasked with the care of fungus-infected trees. My perceptual experience will be the same in both scenarios, since our lines of sight converge on the same tree. It is our shared background knowledge that enables me to determine which aspects of the visual scene you are focusing on and to engage in joint attention with you. Yeah, so this is one of those underdetermination things where you're, am I pointing at the rabbit or the undetached rabbit part? So am I pointing at the apple or the whole tree? I don't know. Alrighty. The knowledge-based view is consistent with a range of positions on how much and what kind of background knowledge are required for joint attention. However, since Campbell restricts his attention to knowledge-based theories that adopt the normality condition, we will make the same restriction here. Campbell criticizes the knowledge-based approach for being cognitively demanding and psychologically unrealistic because it requires infinitely many inferences and infinitely many levels of mental representation. The same objection is made by Alien, Carpenter, and Liebel, and among others, Calabi goes so far as to suggest that the theory entails that joint attention requires a grasp of the concept of infinity. As we have seen, we maintain that this line of criticism is a spurious one, and we will consider it no further. Nevertheless, and regardless of how the knowledge-based approach fares, one can, of course, maintain that the relational theory presents a viable alternative. We now turn to that account. You know, it's a little odd. I mean, this is just like, is this the only objection that these folks had, was just that it's, this infinity problem? I mean, if that's the only problem that they had, it seems like, I mean, I guess, prima facie, it is kind of bad if you have to know about infinity to make anything else work. But if that was the only objection, I mean, theories can handle one problem or two. But yeah, it just doesn't seem like it's, I mean, like the author here said, there's plenty of reason why to choose to do something different. But just having one objection to a theory, I mean, I guess if you think it's decisive, then you get rid of that theory. But just one objection is not always that so bad. Okay. The relational theory of joint attention. On an orthodox analysis, perceptual experiences are constituted not only by our surroundings, but also by our mental representations. Campbell's theory of joint attention extends his anti-representational theory of perception, which he calls relational. On the relational view, the phenomenal character of your experience as you look around the room is constituted by the actual layout of the room itself. Which particular objects are there, their intrinsic properties such as color and shape, and how they are arranged in relation one another to you and to you. On this view, perception is not a matter of representing objects, but involves a non-representational relation between the perceiver and the token object perceived. Up to a point, this agrees with our intuition. When we look around the room, we would normally say that we experience the room itself and its constituents. Therefore, Campbell's account is a representative of what was sometimes called a naive realist view on perceptual experience. Campbell construes perception as a three-place relation. S perceives X as being F, okay? Where the F term stands for something like the aspect under which X is perceived. So if I look around the room, I see the objects it contains as having certain intrinsic properties and being arranged in a certain ways relative to one another and to myself. Campbell doesn't discuss F properties and relations in any detail, which is unfortunate because they play a key role in his account of joint attention, as we will see. However, for our purposes, it suffices to note, as defined by Campbell, perception is purely extinctional relation, which entails that if F is G are the same, S perceives X as being F is equivalent to S perceives X as being G. Okay, so yeah, this is sort of just the world is as it looks, naive realist sort of thing. Campbell considers perception to be a primitive relation in the sense that it is not to be analyzed in such terms as X causes S to have a representational content as something being F, where S experiences this representational content. More generally, perception is a relation between subjects, objects, properties, and relations that is irreducible to other mental states. Okay, so where's this going? Campbell's analysis of joint attention builds on his relational account of perception. On a relational view, joint attention is a primitive phenomenon of consciousness. Just as the object you see can be a constituent of your experience, so too it can be a constituent of your experience that the other person is with you jointly attending to the object. This is not to say that in a case of joint attention, the other person will be an object of your attention. On the contrary, it is only the object you are attending to. It is rather that when there is another person with whom you are jointly attending to the thing, the existence of that other person enters into the individuation of your experience. The other person is there as a co-attender in the periphery of your experience. That's slightly odd, but let's see where it's going. That worries me. It does, because it looks like jointly attending. I'm sure this is why they put this quote here, but it seems kind of odd because is the other person there as co-attender in the periphery. So this co-attender thing already is are you attending to their co-attendingness? I mean, do they have is that what an F is the property of co-attending? Like, so you see them as a co-attender. So that seems like you're predicating a lot of stuff on them if you're there as a co-attender. Okay, continuing. On this account, joint attention involves an X and two individuals who experience each other as co-attending. That is to say, A and B are jointly attending to X if and only if A perceives X as being co-attended by B and B perceives X as being co-attended by A. Here the F term of relational perception, a la Campbell, is instantiated with the property of being co-attended by the other. I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again because it's important. The people writing philosophy tend to be very, very smart. And if you're thinking something, a lot of times it's because they want you to be thinking that. So the whole setup here, which I was just saying, is basically because they wanted me to be thinking this sort of thing. So it's like, they're very smart, and they want, if you're thinking something, a lot of times it's because that was by design. Okay, thus if I'm alone eyeing the cake on the table and you arrive to engage in joint attention with me, then there is a change in my perception of the cake. I now see it as being co-attended by you. But what does it mean for two people to co-attend to an object? Campbell doesn't say, but the most natural answer is, it seems to us that co-attention is just a variant expression for joint attention. A and B perceive an object as being co-attended by the other if and only if they jointly attend to it. Alternatively, and perhaps less likely, co-attention and joint attention may be distinct concepts. We will consider both options shortly. Yeah, I mean, I'd try to... I mean, if it was me in this position, I was Campbell, I don't know what's going to happen next, of course. But I mean, I just define it as a fundamental property, so I don't have to say anything else about it. Okay, well, let's find out. According to Campbell, joint attention differs from other forms of simultaneous attention in two respects. If A and B are jointly attending to X, then first A and B monitor each other's attention, and second A's attention is one of the factors controlling B's attention, and vice versa. In line with his relational principles, Campbell sees attention, monitoring, and control as relations that are to be fleshed out in causal terms. For example, Campbell stipulates that in order for joint attention to be achieved, B's continued attention to X must be one of the causal factors for A's continuing to attend to X, and vice versa. A's continued attention to X must be one of the causal factors for B's continuing to attend to X. Campbell assumes that, well, do you just continue to attend because of the other person forever? That would be ad infinitum. You keep getting a causal loop there. Anyway, Campbell assumes that this coordination of attention may involve the use of subpersonal mechanisms rather than explicit personal level thoughts about the direction of the other person's attention. Here the personal-subpersonal distinction coincides with the introspection-non-introspection distinction, and personal mental states are taken to include sensations, emotions, beliefs, desires, and rational and deliberate thinking. The subpersonal processes for monitoring and control cannot account for the jointness of joint attention because joint attention is a personal level phenomenon, and it is hard to see what the subpersonal processes contribute to the subject's psychological life. The jointness in joint attention is a person-level state. This is why Campbell seeks to explain joint attention in terms of the conscious experience of having the other as co-attender. On Campbell's view, it is precisely in virtue of its perceptual experiential character that joint attention can have the epistemic significance that it has. Campbell maintains that his relational theory of joint attention is free of the difficulties that he and others associate with the knowledge-based approach. First, it doesn't involve the infinite iterating structures that are the hallmark of knowledge-based theories. Second, it doesn't appeal to the background knowledge, and in particular, it doesn't appeal to anything like the normality condition, which on a knowledge-based account is instrumental in generating these iterative structures. In short, on relational analysis, joint attention is defined in terms of perceptual experience. In the following sections, we argue that this position is untenable. Okay, so basically, I think this is what was being said here is sort of what I was expecting Campbell to say. Basically, that this joint attention thing is just going to be a primitive thing at the person level. So it's just something that we can do as people and with other people, and we can just do that, and there's nothing else to be said about it. So it's just that's how it is, and it's this relation that we can be in, and and it's primitive. Okay, so let's see what the authors here are going to say. As a matter of logical necessity, co-attention and joint attention are either the same thing or not. Peacock has noted if co-attention and joint attention are the same thing, the notion of co-attender presupposes the property which is to be explained, that is, the openness of joint attention. Nevertheless, Campbell's own discussion suggests rather strongly that, for him, joint attention and co-attention are identical. To be a co-attender is just to stand in the primitive three-place experiential relation with another co-attender to a common object. Since joint attention is an existential relation, this entails that if x equals x prime, then A and B are jointly attending to x if and only if they're jointly to x prime. Thus, it follows that if A and B are jointly tend to x, a whole bunch of lists here, A perceives x as being co-attended by B, B perceives x as being co-attended by A perceives x as being perceived by B as being co-attended by A, B perceives x as being perceived by A as being co-attended by B, A perceives... okay, and this is the loop, and you keep going. So now joint attention involves the same sort of infinite iterations that, according to Campbell, invalidate the so-called knowledge-based approach. Hence, in this respect, Campbell's theory turns out to mimic the knowledge-based approach. By his own lights, this is an unwanted result, since part of the motivation for claiming that joint attention is a primitive phenomenon of consciousness is to avoid the complex iterations of mental states that plague the knowledge-based approach. While Campbell is not fully clear on the notion of primitiveness, it is often assumed that an infinite regress is blocked just because joint attention is a primitive relation. Yeah, see, this is where I thought they were going. This is what someone wanted to say. Because it is primitive, you just get it all. Either you get it all at once or not, or you get whatever you get, but you don't get an infinite thing. Maybe you could get the infinite regress, but that's like built into the structure. Okay. Well, hey, the authors don't buy it. We fail to see how this line of defense might work, considering the following case. In most versions of propositional logic, conjunction is a primitive non-reductive relation in the sense that it cannot be reduced to other relations. Other versions may take disjunction or implication to be primitive instead. This doesn't prevent it from licensing endless series of inferences. For example, if P and Q holds, then, and you can just keep adding more and more inferences up ad infinitum. Evidently, primitiveness in this itself does not impede recursion, and so there is no reason to suppose that primitiveness of joint attention will block the infinite regress pictured above. Okay, so I've got a major problem with this, and I'll tell you as soon as I finish the paragraph. As Campbell defines it, co-attendance may not be reducible to other individual mental states, but that doesn't prevent the definition from generating a recursive regress. What is crucial to the regress is that the relation is extensional. If primitiveness is meant to resolve the issue, we are owed a positive explanation of what it is and how it accomplishes this feat. Okay, just because you can build stuff up doesn't mean that you can actually explain it. Like, there's two different concepts here. You can make a lot of inferences, but that doesn't mean you can actually reduce it to anything else. So if you just take one of the logical primitives at, like, you can't explain some of the logical primitives away. You have to start with them. This is called the adoption problem, actually. It's due to Kripke. And famously, it also goes back to what the tortoise said to Achilles by Lewis Carroll, Dodgson. So what that says is, look, if you try to explain away universal instantiation, there is no way to actually explain it away without using universal instantiation. You just can't do it. Same with conjunction here. You can, like, if you get rid of all the other logical connectives, or whatever it is, you just can't get rid of all of them and then try to explain them. Because if you try to explain them, you have to use it to do it. So you can't use to explain the logical the objects of logic, the connectives and the quantifiers. You need to be able to instantiate to show what it is to instantiate. There's no way around it. It's a very difficult problem in the philosophy of logic and epistemology of logic. So at that point, you just have to throw up your hands and say, look, either you understand what the universal instantiation is, or you don't. And if you don't, it's actually not possible to talk to you, because we're not talking even like with the same logic at that point. Because I can't explain it to you without actually already using it. And you can't understand it without already using it. So there is this sort of logic defense here. Might be slightly misplaced, is what I would say. Because just because you can build infinite things out of something doesn't mean you can... going the other direction is different. So if something's primitive, you may just have to accept it as being primitive. And so just because if you perceive that someone else is perceiving, maybe you can just get all of that at once, because that is the nature of the thing. So yeah, so that's the adoption problem in the epistemology of logic. How do you learn about logical connectives? We don't know. We just don't, like, it's an open problem. No one actually understands. And so the idea that you're going to explain stuff in terms of just building them up, that doesn't, so this might have a technical issue here. Okay. That doesn't mean I agree with Campbell either, because the unlikelihood that the epistemology of logic and that metaphysics applies to co-attention is unlikely. So, but I'm just saying I don't agree with this argumentation here. Okay, thus the assumption that co-attention is joint attention, which Campbell seems to subscribe to, leads to major trouble for his account. Well, I agree with that, though, for different reasons. Therefore, let's consider the possibility that co-attention and joint attention are not the same thing, and let's grant, if only for the sake of the argument, that this will block the infinite regress that would otherwise ensue. According to Campbell, when we are engaged in joint attention, there is a difference between how I am related to the co-attended object and how I am related to you. Each person is there and enters the other's experience as co-attender. We will not try to provide full-dress definition of co-attention, but will merely consider what are likely to be some of the minimal conditions that must hold for someone to enter another person's perceptual experience as co-attender. In order to experience B as a co-attender, A must be able to recognize that B co-attends X with her. Apart from the fact that this is a natural assumption to make, it is also in line with what Campbell writes about other F properties. To experience the shape of a solid object, you must have some capacity to recognize manifest sameness of shape across movements by you or by the object. Otherwise, it is hard to see how you could be said to be encountering the property of three-dimensional shape at all. Yeah, you need some consistency. By analogy, having the capacity to recognize co-attention when one encounters it is a necessary precondition for joint attention. What does this capacity involve? For starters, it is a plausible candidate. It is the ability to recognize the other as an inanimate entity, separate from oneself. An animate entity separate from oneself, and to sense, however minimally, the other's agency, for example, that they have goals different from one's own. But clearly this won't suffice for me to see you as a co-attender rather than merely as a person who happens to be looking in the same direction, for example, who is incapable of looking in the first place. or who is incapable of looking in the first place. Thus, we are led to suppose that the ability to recognize co-attention requires the ability to include as candidate co-attenders people whose line of sight intersects with the target object and exclude the blind, blindfolded, comatose, and so on. But these are precisely sort of requirements that make up the normality condition on which the knowledge-based view is based. This is bad news for Campbell's account for two reasons. First, because he explicitly seeks to avoid any appeal to knowledge, beliefs, or awareness of the two participants. Secondly, because on the knowledge-based view, the normality condition is the linchpin in generating the endless iterations of psychological states that Campbell rejects. Again, we have come to a point at which the relational account threatens to converge with the knowledge-based account. The key observation on which the foregoing argument is based is just that the kind of content that seems to be needed to flesh out the notion of co-attention is the same as what goes into the normality condition. No assumptions have been made about the nature of that content, except for the fact that if this content is a prerequisite for my joint attentional perceptual experience, it cannot itself be accounted for in terms of that experience. This point bears emphasizing because the normality condition has been held to require a grasp of a concept of psychological normality and all that goes with it. As far as we can tell, that is not the case. Whatever kind of content is involved in co-attention will work for normality too. Okay, yeah, I'm thinking this is all correct right here. If you are going to try to do this sort of thing, I think the author is correct in this area. I still think Campbell could try the defense of the fundamentality stuff above. Yeah. I don't think it would work, but I think that would be the way to go. Okay. As discussed in section 2, while the knowledge-based view is consistent with the hypothesis that, in principle, joint attention may be affected by any kind of knowledge, it allows for a range of positions on how much and what kind of knowledge are required for joint attention. The normality condition may be seen as an attempt at capturing at least some of that knowledge. In the foregoing, we were led to conclude that whatever co-attention may be, it seems likely to involve the same kind of knowledge. The bottom line is that at least some knowledge must be involved in any analysis of joint attention. If we try to do without any form of knowledge whatsoever, a feasible account of joint attention is outside our reach. Therefore, the relational view is on the wrong track. In the remainder of this paper, we discuss two further issues that reinforce this conclusion. Okay, let's see, can I say anything else about the first view? Nah, defining this sort of relational thing as primitive, you can do it, but I think what happens then, it just becomes an ad hoc theory. You're just saying, well, you can't do it as a primitive and there's nothing else to say, and eventually, that may be great for a long time, but it eventually won't work. That doesn't, of course, as the authors say, that they're not endorsing the other view, but I agree that on their analysis, it's there's going to be problems. Okay, 5. Causal monitoring. On Campbell's view, when we are engaged in joint attention, you are a constitutive part of my experience. For this to happen, some causal conditions must be met. Part of your causal contribution to my experience is that you are continuously attending to the object I'm attending to. More formally, A's continuing attention to X must be one of the factors causally sustaining B's continuing to attend to X, and B's continued attention to X must be one of the factors causally sustaining A's continuing to attend to X. I can just see kids fighting over this piece of cake. Like, that's just kind of what I have in my head. I suspect maybe the author does too. It's like some kids are just like, I see you looking at my cake, and the other one's like, I see you looking at my cake, and they're like looking at each other and looking at the cake, and like they're trying to like think, how am I going to get the cake away from the other dude? And it's like, yeah. Okay. These conditions can be interpreted strongly or weakly. On a strong interpretation, causal monitoring must be literally continuous, that is, uninterrupted. This interpretation is suggested by Campbell's own words, which we have reproduced almost verbatim. On the weak interpretation, monitoring need not be continuous in order to sustain joint attention. It is not hard to see that, in both versions, Campbell's causal conception of monitoring is problematic. On the strong interpretation, it is unrealistic. On the weak interpretation is how to see it could be causal. Since the two interpretations are jointly exhaustive, it is doubtful that the mutual monitoring on which joint attention is generally agreed to be based on is a causal relation. Yeah, the two kids like basically completely eyeing each other and like trying to get at the cake is a bit of an unrealistic view. Alright, and let's see. What's wrong with the weak one again? Oh yeah, because it just breaks up too much, so why would it be mutual at that point? You'd have a hard time even defining how it would be mutual causation. Okay, because there'd be too many gaps. Consider the strong version. Oh, sorry, they're going to explain. Okay, consider the strong version first. On this interpretation, you have to keep looking at our cake without interruption in order for our state of joint intention to persist. If you divert your gaze even for a second, the causal connection is broken. Well, I can see two things at once, so I mean, that's not terrible. It's still unrealistic. So even if the causal connection is broken, I cease to experience you as a co-attender, and our joint attention is no more. This is clearly wrong. When we jointly attend to our cake, for example, we typically alternate gazes between the cake and each other. If both of us were fixedly staring at the cake without checking with each other every once in a while, we wouldn't be engaged in joint attention. Hence, on the strong interpretation, causal monitoring fails to account for the facts. You know, you might have to. This looks like it could be repaired, just in like you could have a loop as opposed to just me looking at you and the cake at the same time. Me looking at either one of you or back and forth would be all that would really be needed. It's still ridiculous, but like, I mean, maybe that's repairable. Because like I can just see the kids fighting and like cake person, and that's like really what's going on here. Okay, on a weak interpretation, your eye. Okay, maybe that's just what they mean by weak. Your eye gaze is allowed to shift between cake and myself, and perhaps other objects as well. But then how can we account in purely causal terms for the difference between a solid 10-minute bout of joint attention and an interval of the same length during which our joint attention is briefly interrupted every now and then? Yeah, the breaking it up is going to mess this up. On a knowledge-based model, joint attention may be sustained in part by informational processes that enable us to distinguish between genuine interruptions and merely apparent ones. For example, if it is common knowledge between A and B that each is equally interested in X, and the other, then the alternating gazing between each other and X are more likely to be experienced as joint attention than if it was common ground that X is of predominant interest for both A and B. It's hard to see how such observations could be accommodated by a purely causal model, and the perceptual relation is meant to support. To explain this point a bit further, we must turn to our last topic, failures of joint attention. Alright, I mostly agree with the authors here about the issues, so no big deal. Let's see, I'm trying to think how does joint attention, how would I explain this different from either of these? I don't know, so it seems like an interesting topic though. When joint attention fails. Once again, we have been jointly attending to our cake for a while. When you start daydreaming about your next holiday, and although you're still gazing at the cake, your mind is now elsewhere. Hence, our episode of joint attention has come to an end, but as far as I'm concerned, we are still looking at the cake together. How is this possible? In his 2011 article, Campbell diagnoses the situation as follows. Being an experiential relation like blank sees blank is introspectable. X can tell just by reflection that he or she is co-attending with Y to X. However, here as so often, introspection is not an infallible source of knowledge. You may think you are co-attending Y to Z, even though Y left long ago. Based on introspection, I believe that we are jointly attending to the cake while in fact we are doing no such thing anymore. On Campbell's account, this scenario that theories of direct perceptual experience are all too... This is a scenario that theories of direct perceptual experience are all too familiar with. Consider the following experiment. A subject is looking at a tennis ball during the 200 milliseconds of an eye blink is replaced with another qualitatively indistinguishable ball. So our subject doesn't notice the change, and as far as she is concerned, her perceptual experience is the same as before. For a relational theory like Campbell, the case is clear-cut. The replacement causes the subject to enter into a new perceptual state, even if she fails to notice it. This claim is controversial, but it is the logical consequence of the premise that, in veridical perception, external objects and their properties partly constitute one's conscious experience. This premise clashes with the intuition that two conscious perceptual experiences that are indistinguishable for a subject are necessarily the same. It is generally agreed that these two notions are difficult, if not impossible, to square. However, we will not address that issue here, and merely want to point out, compared to the tennis ball experiment, cases of false joint attention raise additional issues for the relational account. Yeah, at this point I'm getting the Homer Simpson wearing the glasses that have like his eyeballs open on them, so it looks like his eyes are open, but he's sleeping. So it's like, yeah, and so people think Homer's awake, but only for a while because he usually starts snoring. Okay, so and if you have to be constituted by the other person's yeah, so basically if one's Homer's asleep, it's hard to have joint attention with him. But you don't know that until you realize he's asleep. Doesn't take too long though. Alright, first, whereas in the tennis ball experiment, the perceived objects are numerically distant, in our case of failing joint attention, it is just the fact that you cease to pay attention to the cake that, according to Campbell, causes a change in my perceptual experience. By hypothesis, there are no external factors that might causally account for my change of perceptual state. Only neural changes in you might conceivably qualify for this job. Therefore, Campbell owes us an account of how covert changes in the brain states of one person can affect perceptual experiences in another. Secondly, since the relational view allows for dissociations between my perceptual experience and my beliefs about my perceptual experience, dissociations between my perceptual experience and my beliefs about my perceptual experience, it also allows for the possibility that I am engaged in joint attention, but mistaken believe that I am not. But this seems to be at odds with the key feature of joint attention that, as noted in the introduction, all parties agree on. Joint attention is public, it has a special kind of openness or mutual manifestness. On Campbell's account, this openness is constituted by my perceptual experience and yours, and therefore I can mistakenly believe that we are not engaged in joint attention because I am wrong about my experience. This sounds like a downright contradiction to us. It is one thing to suppose that I can wrongly believe that we are engaged in joint attention, this possibility that every theory should allow for, but it is quite another thing to suppose I can wrongly believe that we are not engaged in joint attention. This is a possibility that, in our view, should be ruled out by the very notion of joint attention, and if this much is true, it is problematic that Campbell's account fails to do so. Okay, I guess, yeah, so because of how it's only without introspection, I guess you can be mistaken about it. Yeah, it's interesting. Alright, conclusion. Yeah, getting a little late, time to wrap up. The relational approach has been touted as a superior alternative to the knowledge-based approach and has been claimed to provide an account of joint attention anchored in its perceptual experiential character, which avoids an infinite regress of inferences, does not require conceptual understanding, and generally imposes minimal demands on processing and representation. For these reasons, it has proved to be attractive to the philosophers and psychologists concerned with social cognition and its development. In the foregoing, we have argued that Campbell's theory is untenable, and at several points come perilously close to collapsing into its knowledge-based competitor. To begin with, the relational analysis is either results in an infinite regress of psychological states or necessitates elaborations of the notion of co-attention that makes indistinguishable from the notion of normality employed by knowledge-based theories. Further, the theory requires a causal notion of attention monitoring, which is either too strict to be realistic or so loose that it cannot be a purely causal notion in the first place. Finally, the theory implies a counterintuitive dissociation between my perceptual experience and my beliefs about my perceptual experience, which becomes problematic when considering a case of joint attention failure. Where do we go from here? The relational view is predicated on the assumption that joint attention is fundamentally a type of primitive perceptual state, not itself susceptible to explanations in terms of knowledge, beliefs, or awareness of the two participants. Our discussion suggests that the difficulties the relational view faces may be tackled by abandoning this assumption and by taking into account the knowledge, beliefs, or informational states of each participant in joint attention. Of course, joint attention certainly includes perceptual experiential aspects. Our discussion of the relational view suggests, however, that these perceptual aspects are not sufficient for an account of joint attention. Further work in theoretical explanation of joint attention may do well taking into account the combination of sensory experience and individual epistemic states. To sum up, we believe that our argument raises serious issues for the theory of joint attention that adopt a relational take on perceptual experience. More generally, they suggest that theories anchored in perceptual experience will have to factor in at least some knowledge, belief, or awareness into the analysis of joint attention. Okay, cool. Yeah, this is a nice paper. I don't know a ton about the background here on this joint attention thing. I'm not as convinced. I'm not entirely convinced by. I'm basically convinced that the authors their minimal point that you're not going to get away with a purely relational count. I'm not so convinced actually that the relational count won't like fight back against this. I think they probably can, especially the normality condition that is needed. They can claim that I think that there's a chance that a little too much is going to be built into the normality condition on the too much is built into the normality condition, and that's exactly, they're going to say, well, you are building too much into the normality condition, and which we are describing better by saying how we're getting it as a relation. So I think there's a connection between the normality condition and a relational experiential thing that needs to be spelled out. I think the relationalists can defend themselves against the logical attack that I criticize over here. This understanding that if something's primitive, then infinite is assumed that the infinite regress is blocked because of joint if it's a primitive relation. Well, if it's primitive and you get all the stuff with it, that's what it is to be that relation, then you, just because you can add stuff to it, that doesn't mean that you didn't block the particular infinite regress that it was meant to block. Just because there's other ones, like this logic one, doesn't mean that what was meant to be blocked wasn't blocked. So I think there's something there that the relationalist can do. But like I said, I think they're not going to get out of all of these problems. The causal problem, I think, is a very serious one, where it's if it's supposed to be some sort of direct causal structure, I'm not sure how they're going to square that one, and I think that's a very good argument the authors put together here. Okay, so that's it for now. Unless any of the viewers have a question, I'll try to answer it. Thank you for making this open access, whoever paid for that. Sure it wasn't the publisher. Otherwise, have a good night and stay safe, everyone. All right, bye-bye. I'll be back in the morning.